Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to News Dose. So, over the last couple of years, we've talked a lot about studio acquisitions. It really feels like the game industry right now is just on an all-out feeding frenzy for these studios, and it's gotten to the point that there's been some real talk about publisher acquisitions. Of course, Microsoft, they acquired Bethesda. They also are in the intent of acquiring Activision Blizzard. So this has led to a lot of discussion on whether or not we'll see some other publisher acquisitions similar to this. And well, about that, it might be happening after all. So we're going to talk about that one a little later on the video. And then also, Xbox back in 2014 made a decision that might have came back to bite them just a little bit. So we'll talk about that one as well. Beyond all that though, of course, per usual, if you like the video, go ahead and hit that like button below, as well as hit that bell notification and subscribe button as well. That way you can keep up to date with all of the latest gaming news. Other than that though, let's just go and get right into the video, starting off with the Summer Game Fest. We're now just a few short weeks away before we start to see all of those big June events. Very excited for all of that. And while the schedule hasn't completely been publicly revealed, Jeff Keighley, the host of the Summer Game Fest, has now revealed that we will see fewer third-party showcases this year in 2022. Now, don't worry too much about all this though, because he claims this is because they've opted on showing their games at some of these other big events, such as his very own Summer Game Fest that takes place on June 9th. And then you also have the Xbox Bethesda Showcase, where they'll show their games there as well, being June 12th. And then hypothetically, if Nintendo and PlayStation, if they do decide to have their own showcases as well in the month of June, then I guarantee that we'll see plenty of third-party games at their events on top of that. So truthfully, I don't think that this is a big deal at all. And quite honestly, it might actually be better this way. For a very long time, the platform holders have kind of carried E3, and I don't really see this year being all that much different in terms of the Summer Game Fest lineup. I mean, sure, it's got a different name and everything, but you kind of know what to expect when it comes to these third-party showcases. And I mean, EA, Ubisoft, Square Enix, etc., they're not really known to have the greatest showcases in the world. And it might just be better for them to show their most promising content at other big showcases. That, to me, is probably more respectful of the community's time than what we have seen in the past, and we can still see their upcoming content as well at, again, some of these other big events. So again, I don't think that this is necessarily a problem at all, but let me know what you think about all of this. Do you think that this sounds better or worse? Let me know in the comments below. Moving on though, we did get another update for those PlayStation Classics that are coming sometime here soon. Of course, you can either subscribe to PlayStation Plus Premium for $120 a year, or, and here's the really good news, you can buy these games separately without the need for a subscription at a pretty affordable price. So far, it looks like they're being priced between $5 to $9, which I think is actually a pretty good deal here, especially when you start to consider all the enhancements that some of these games include. Last week, we did talk about how Siphon Filter comes included with trophy support, which I think is absolutely brilliant, but now it also seems like a few others have been confirmed to have trophy support as well. This includes Ape Escape, IQ Intelligent Cube, Hot Shots Golf, Wild Arms, and again, of course, Siphon Filter. Unfortunately, though, it does appear that adding trophy support is optional for these games, but I imagine a lot of these games will include trophies just because I think that alone will boost overall sales. I think it's a pretty good incentive for people to buy these games again, so I do imagine that they will try to add trophy support to as many games as they possibly can. Some of these other enhancements, though, includes a variety of scaling methods. PSP games, they're now up-resed. You also have a CRT filter if you really want to go old school, and you can even rewind and do quick saves for games now. So this is all sounding very good so far, and I'm actually impressed with Sony's outing here for their classic lineup. I was originally worried that they'd lock these games behind PlayStation Plus Premium, as I personally think that it's far too much for classic games. I really think that these games need to be in a cheaper tier, something like what Nintendo Switch Online is, but the fact that you can buy these games separately, that does kind of make up for that, and because they're also affordable, and also they do have new features as well, I think that they're doing a good job here, and now I just kind of hope that they can keep this up with a constant flow of classic games in the near future. I mean, there's certainly a lot of games that they can bring over to a service like this, so we'll see how all of this plays out, but very happy with what we've seen so far from these PlayStation Classics. Now, we also got a very welcome update for Stalker 2 that I'm really happy to share today, and that's simply that the studio has revealed that development has now once again resumed. Unfortunately, GSC World, as some of you all might know, is located in Ukraine. And as we all kind of know, they've had a lot of problems to deal with as they had to leave their home country and reestablish elsewhere. They're truthfully dealing with problems far more grand than the world of video games, but it's just so amazing to see that GSC World is once again able to work on the game that they and fans have been just so passionate about. I really cannot imagine all the emotions that's going through their minds as they lead up to Stalker 2's release. Now, as for the actual release date itself, though, it was originally planned to come out in late 2022 as an Xbox console exclusive, and in fact, it's actually launching directly into Xbox Game Pass, but I imagine with the development halting the way it did over the last couple of months, it might be pushed into early 2023. The fact that this game is able to resume development and release at all, though, is just absolutely fantastic news, and really, I hope it turns out to be a smashing hit, not just for fans, but really for GSC World themselves and all that they've had to deal with. I'm really rooting for them here, so let's hope that Stalker 2 turns out to be a fantastic game when it does eventually release. Let's go and talk about this massive publisher acquisition, though, because if anybody was hoping that Activision will be the last, unfortunately, that does not appear to be the case at all. Reports are now indicating that EA could be the next publisher on the cusp of being sold. Okay, so here we go again. The game industry really is on an all-out selling frenzy, and this could point to a big shakeup in the game industry rather soon. A few years ago, if you remember right, Phil Spencer alluded to being concerned of another big corporation possibly entering the game market, and that comment now is more accurate than ever before. Now, there could be a debate made that Xbox might have saved Activision Blizzard from maybe being picked up by another big corporation out there, as reportedly other companies were involved, such as Facebook, as an example. Now, I don't know about you, but I trust Xbox a whole lot more than a company like Facebook to have such beloved franchises like Diablo or Call of Duty or Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, and the list kind of goes on and on. But well, here we are again, less than a year later, and one of the biggest publishers is reportedly looking to sell, and we do have an incomplete list on some of the companies they've tried to sell to. This includes NBC Universal, Apple, Amazon, and even Disney. Now, from my understanding, this is not the complete list or anything like that, but considering the price that EA is likely trying to go for here, there's not a lot of companies that would be able to purchase them. We're talking about the upper echelon of corporations here with bags and bags of money, such as the ones already listed. And then there's others out there like maybe Google or somebody like Netflix. Now, I should probably note that this report is coming from Puck, and they state that EA has been persistent in the pursuit to sell. In fact, it sounds like they've been trying to sell for quite a while now, well before the Activision Blizzard Microsoft buyout even. That really only seems to have made them even more ambitious, but to no avail so far. It does sound like the NBC Universal talks might have gone on for the longest, but considering they haven't found a buyer so far, does maybe point to EA having a little bit too high of expectations, or at least as of this moment. It's not quite clear as to the reason why they haven't been able to sell so far, but from what we're hearing, that might come down to the price and structure of EA. It's also being reported that EA might be more interested in a merger, and they want Wilson to remain the chief executive of the combined companies. So this right here might be why we've yet to see them complete a deal, but at the same time, it does look like if they find the right suitor, they're absolutely going to pull the trigger. And that does take us back to Phil Spencer's comment that, again, he made years ago. This could be a very real chance for one of these big corporations to come in and make a big splash in the game industry. This would immediately put somebody on the map with several studios and a list of beloved franchises, including Mass Effect. They have Dragon Age, Dead Space, Need for Speed, and even Battlefield, which, I mean, it has recently had some problems, but still it is a massive, massive franchise. This would be a huge opportunity for anybody looking to take gaming serious, though as to who would actually be willing to make an acquisition or a merger of this size kind of remains to be seen. Let me know what you think about all of this, though. Do you think EA will sell in 2022? And if so, who do you think will purchase them? Now, speaking of big companies, we do need to talk about Xbox and Disney, or more specifically, Marvel. So in recent years, Disney has really pushed into gaming, though not necessarily with studio acquisitions or anything like that, but rather they've taken a different approach. They actually seem much more comfortable just licensing out their big IP, whether that be with something like Spider-Man. You also have Star Wars, or even something like Avatar as an example. If you start to take a look though, something that's really interesting about all this is that all of these games are actually coming from different publishers. Well, it's now been revealed, thanks to Jay Ong, which is the head of Marvel Games, that back in 2014 they were unhappy with their Activision partnership, which we'll get back to here in just a moment. But because of that, they did approach some different publishers out there, including both Xbox and PlayStation. Again, this was back in 2014, and as we all kind of know, PlayStation accepted this partnership and created none other than the phenomenal Spider-Man game developed by Insomniac Games. However, Xbox passed on the offer as they reportedly wanted to focus on their own first-party games, which I think was kind of a mistake and understandable all at the same time. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, again, you have to keep in mind this was back in 2014 under a very different Xbox. Xbox really started to make a big shift right around 2017 when Microsoft as a company started to actually support Xbox. Prior to that, though, Xbox was more or less under fire. There were real questions about the future of Xbox, as Xbox One was not doing well. They reportedly didn't have much funding at this time either, and they were very low on their own first-party studios. You have to remember that back in 2014, they really only had about 6 AAA studios. This included 343, which of course was working on Halo. Then you have the Coalition, they were working on Gears of War. You also had Turn 10, which was the Forza studio. Mojang is the Minecraft studio. Then you have Rare and Lionhead, which were working on their own games at that time as well. So they didn't exactly have a lot of resources to kind of work with, and then you also have to remember that at this point in time, Marvel games were not viewed in the same way that they are today. Sony's kind of the ones that changed that with Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4, which turned out to be absolutely astounding. That kind of changed everything for the game industry, as now movie-related IP, comic book IP, etc., are taken very serious. Whereas prior to this, most video game adaptations outside of a few like the Batman Arkham games were not all that well received. This really right here is just yet another reason as to why Disney was not necessarily happy with their relationship in Activision. But yeah, back then there was a real stigma with these game-related adaptations, similar to what we see with movie-related adaptations of video games. But things really have changed a lot since back then, as it seems like the game industry, they've kind of learned how to adapt some of these franchises, and we have started to see some more successful licensed IP here in recent years. So I think that if we look at this in 2022, in retrospect, yeah, it comes off as a bit of a mistake on Xbox's part. But I think some kind of forget just how things were shaping up in 2014. When you combine Xbox's troubles during that time, the low amount of studios that they had, and then the overall stigma that licensed IP outside of a select few tended to turn out bad. So when you start to put all that together, you can kind of understand why they might have made the decision that they did, again, back in 2014. But at the same time, I think that a lot of credit is owed to Sony. They really did kind of help change the landscape of these licensed IP and showed what kind of success that you can truly have if you do it right. Spider-Man was a big part of that just because of how good it was and how many units it sold. And now with that, there's a real excitement for these type of games again that really wasn't there back in 2014. Now we're seeing games like Hogwarts Legacy, Avatar, Indiana Jones, and so on and so forth. So again, I think that this move kind of, yes, it bit Xbox because just of how successful Spider-Man was for PlayStation. But if given the same opportunity in 2022, I think that Xbox's decision might be different, as these games are just viewed very differently compared to what they were back then. And that is in large part thanks to PlayStation and just how well they did with Spider-Man. Let's go and take a look at the poll of the day, though, and as we talked about last week, Norman Reedus might have accidentally let it slip out that a Death Stranding sequel is in development. So, I wanted to ask you all, would you like Hideo Kojima to make a Death Stranding sequel? And as you can see here, 26% of you said yes, you want this to happen, while 61% of you said no. And okay, that's fair enough. Death Stranding is one of those very polarizing games. I have noticed a lot of people, they love this game or they hate it. It's not necessarily a game for everybody. It can kind of be described as a walking simulator, which, again, not everybody's particularly going to like that, especially with a big AAA game. However, there are some people out there that just absolutely loves Death Stranding, and I will say that Death Stranding Director's Cut, it was a big improvement over the original game. It does seem like Hideo Kojima and Kojima Productions, they did learn from some of the mistakes they made with the original game, and they improved upon that. And I do think that Death Stranding has some really good ideas. So I think that if they do a Death Stranding sequel, which right now looks like that very well might end up being the case, I think that they'll kind of change some things up and just kind of take what they learned with that first game and really run with it in the second game. If you didn't notice with the Director's Cut, they started to maybe lean in a little bit more on the stealth-based tactics, so they could probably lean into that a little bit more with a sequel, make it a little bit more similar to something like Metal Gear Solid, as an example. That is what Kojima is best known for. So we'll see how all this turns out, but based off of some of the things we're hearing, it does look like, yes, there's a very good possibility that this might indeed end up being in development. Even Kojima, after that leak happened last week, he made a bit of a cryptic tweet online that has him standing over top of Norman Reedus with a baseball bat, and it's almost kind of like him saying, "This was supposed to be private information. Go back to your private room," is actually what the tweet says. So I thought that was a little bit of a funny tweet that he posted, but yeah, it does seem like Death Stranding 2 might actually be in development, which personally, I'll be very excited to see how that turns out. I am a big fan of Hideo Kojima, and I think that he will have learned a lot from that first game. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode, but if you liked the video, don't forget the bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.